Welcome to Module 3. We are focusing in this lecture and on this small module on the Puritans and specifically the Salem witch trials. So our dates are from 1620, the first Puritan settlement, to 1692, this moment of Puritan crisis as their society is changing in 1692. So we're still hanging out in our early English colonization. We're moving north away from Virginia, north into New England to focus on that crisis. And you're also going to be writing a short reflection on a secondary source that tells us a little bit more about Tituba, one of the victims of the Salem witch trials. So map-wise, we're still here in, I'm gonna go back to this map. We're still hanging out in English colonization. We are specifically moving up to New England. So we're moving up here into New England. I'm gonna get my laser pointer out. Yes, I love it. All right. And most of our focus is also going to be on Massachusetts and the Massachusetts Bay Colony. All right, let's talk about the Pilgrims. So you know that Virginia, we talked about Virginia and Maryland both quickly became societies dominated by a small aristocracy, those elite Virginians, you'll remember, who ruled over many laborers serving in forms of unfree labor. But New England colonial society evolved differently. New England was really decisively shaped by the Puritans, who were a diverse group of English Protestants. Remember, now we have two major branches of Christianity, Catholicism and Protestantism. The Puritans are a type of Protestants, and specifically they're Protestants who believed that the Church of England, the Anglican Church, that Protestant church that Henry created so he could divorce Catherine, they believed that the Anglican Church was still too Catholic. If you've ever been to an Anglican service, you know that it kind of looks like a Catholic service. They have the same hierarchy of bishops, archbishops. They just don't have a pope at the top, right? They had Henry and then Elizabeth. So Puritans believed, hey, that's still too Catholic. And they had a lot of beefs with the Anglican Church and Catholicism, but one of the things that they really didn't like was that hierarchy, because Puritans practiced a congregationalism. They're congregationalists. All that means is they reject church structures that go any higher than the congregation. So your church that you go to and that church leadership, that's as high as it goes. Very, very different than the Anglican or the Catholic, or by this point, Lutheran hierarchies are much different than the Pilgrims wanted. So instead of all that church hierarchy, they embraced independent local congregations that chose their own clergy, determined their own mode of worship. And also they listened to sermons, and instead of homilies, they personally studied the Bible. That's different than Catholicism at this time or Anglicanism. Now, they're also Calvinists. Okay, I'm not a Calvinist, so I'm going to explain really briefly kind of what Calvinism is. If any of you are Calvinists, you're going to be like, hey, that's not all it is. So I'm just telling you like the little bite-sized portion of Calvinism. John Calvin believed that you are predestined to be saved or not saved. That because God is all powerful and all knowing, he knows who's saved and who isn't saved. And all you can do is hope for the best. Live your life as if you are one of the chosen. Live your life as if you're saved, but you're never going to know for sure. Puritans are Calvinist in that way. They believe that God had predestined the elect to be saved from damnation. No amount of good deeds, no amount of good works, no amount of prayer could save you if you were not among the elect. Now, all this talk of congregationalism, independent congregations, people personally studying the Bible, you may be getting an incorrect impression that the Puritans are all about like individual thought and judgment. No, the congregation is as low as it goes. The members of the church, the people that are attending the church, their responsibility is to be obedient to church leadership. Now, because the Puritans are going to leave England to escape religious persecution, they are not popular in England. So they're going to leave to escape religious persecution. That might also misleadingly lead you to think that they are all about religious liberty or religious toleration. No, not at all. Their aim is going to be to create a society that is Puritan. They don't want other religions in their society. And like many English, they're not alone in this, but they're very anti-Catholic. But again, they're not alone in this. Okay, so Puritans, they're going to head to America to be able to practice their version of Protestant faith away from the Anglican Church and the English government that enforced the rules of the Anglican Church. 1620, they're coming to settle in Virginia, but as you know, their ship, the Mayflower, is blown off course and they land in Cape Cod or on Cape Cod. As they were journeying to what will become the Plymouth colony, the men in the Mayflower had already drawn up the Mayflower Compact. Like the House of Burgesses, the Mayflower Compact is one of the things that we look at as a precursor to our own Constitution. The Mayflower Compact is a written document. It describes a society, a political structure in which all adult male colonists agree to obey just and equal laws enacted by representatives of their own choosing. So they're creating an elected assembly that they all consent to. That's very different than a monarchy, right? People don't consent to a monarchy. You're born under a monarchy. The belief is God put you there and the monarch rules over you. The Mayflower Compact is very different. So if we're looking at antecedents to our own Constitution, we want to look at the House of Burgesses in Virginia and the Mayflower Compact in New England, of course. All right. So that's 1620. That's our first Puritans. By 1642, a great migration. 21,000 Puritans had entered the Massachusetts Bay Colony. All right, who's this guy? You've been staring at his face while I talk, like, oh, he's got a long face. That's John Winthrop. John Winthrop is going to be a leader in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, highly influential. You can see that ruffs are still in for men and women, still the fashion, although Puritans dress remarkably different than other English people. You see this black, simple attire. That's a mark of a Puritan. Simple black attire. You've seen images of Puritans and you might say to yourself, they all match. Why are they all dressed the same? That's not an accident. All right. So John Winthrop over here, back to him. He hopes to found a city set upon a hill, where Puritans would create a society, not just to be a shining beacon to the world, but think about a city on a hill. Everyone can see it. It's exposed. He wants every part of everyone's life to be open, right? There's no secrets in Puritanism and in Puritan society. The city on a hill is going to be exposed for everyone to see. And he says in this city upon a hill, or as they're going to be as a city upon a hill, Puritans will reject, according to Winthrop, natural liberty, action without restraint. And instead, they will practice moral liberty. What is moral liberty? Moral liberty is the choice to submit to church leadership and church doctrine. And Winthrop likened this to a marriage between a man and a woman. And he's actually, this is going to sound really old-fashioned to you, but he's actually a little bit radical for his day. He says that a marriage can only happen when a woman consents to submit to her husband, but she only consents once. Once she has consented to that marriage, her liberty is the liberty to submit, right? He says that's like the church. That's what moral liberty is. Now, like I said, that sounds really old-fashioned to some of you, but again, there's that really important moment. She has to consent first. The Mayflower Compact, they have to consent to obey those laws. But once you've consented once, that's it, it's done. This moral liberty, the submission to church, is antithetical, according to Winthrop, to natural liberties. We're going to see a change where natural liberty in the Enlightenment becomes a good thing. Winthrop says, no, natural liberties are bad. That's where you just do whatever you want. And who did he believe had natural liberty? A strange mix of folk. Catholics. If you're Catholic or you know Catholics, you're like, wait, what? Catholics just get to do whatever they want? According to Winthrop, they're very anti-Catholic. The Irish, who he saw, as most English people saw, as uncivilized heathens, little scare quote there. He said the Irish have this natural liberty, and Native Americans, ignoring the religious and political structures that exist in the local tribes like the Wampanoag. Winthrop says Native Americans have this natural liberty, they do whatever they want. So Puritans, you better stay away from them. Puritans gave some lip service to the idea that, well, should we convert Native Americans? Is that what we're here for? And you can see that this seal of the Massachusetts Bay Colony has an Indigenous person, and he's saying, come over and help us. Come save us from our natural liberties. But in practice, Puritans were deeply concerned that Native Americans would have an undue influence on Puritans, or that Puritans would leave and go live with Native Americans. So in practice, they very much worked to keep their society apart from Native Americans. Now, they also did recognize Native American claims to the land. They sought to acquire it through purchase. But they also saw Native Americans as savages and heathens who should be pushed off of that land. And I want to go back here. Nope. Sorry, I thought I had something else I wanted to tell you about. John Winthrop. Let's not worry about it. All right. This led to war. As the white population of New England increased, so did tensions with regional Native Americans. In 1637, colonists responded to the murder of a fur trader. So a fur trader was murdered by a few members of the Pequots, a powerful tribe in southern New England that controlled the fur trade. They responded to this murder by destroying a Pequot village at Mystic, Connecticut, where they massacred more than 500 men, women, and children. This Pequot defeat led to further white settlement and growth of Puritan settlements into Western New England. It also intimidated local Native Americans into quiescence. They were like, we're not going to go to war with the Puritans. They massacred 500 people in response to the murder of a fur trader. What else do I want to tell you? A little bit. Yeah, all right. What else were Puritans all about? Families and patriarchal authority of the Puritan husband and father absolutely defined colonial society. Adult men controlled the labor of women and children in a farming society without large numbers of slaves or indentured servants. Remember, this is very different than Virginia. Women were held to be the spiritual equals to men, and they could become full members of the church, but they're legally subservient to male authority in the home. They are not permitted to teach or guide men in spiritual matters, and of course, they can't vote. The average New England woman married young, gave birth 7 times. Puritans loved making more Puritans. It was one of their favorite things to do. This is a hierarchical society. Families of social prominence got the best land, and that way it's a lot like Virginia. The most desirable seats in church, it mattered where you sat in the church, and the best families sat in the best places. Divisions were also established in areas such as attire and language for addressing each other. How you dressed indicated what level of society you were at. Some liberties did apply to all, but separate ideas were applied to different groups. The body of liberties, that is the governing doctrine of the settlement did allow slavery, and the first slave appeared in the records in 1640. Puritans believed religious uniformity to be vital to social order. So this social order helped to reinforce religious uniformity. Toleration of dissent would disrupt that order. So religious liberty, again, meant the liberty to abide by these social and religious structures. Religious liberty meant the liberty to submit and zip it. All right. Okay. So what happened when there was dissent? There's immediately dissent, all right? Like within 10 years, people are like, wait, I have different ideas about how we should run things. New England's Puritans, they respect individual judgment, individual spiritual discernment, but they absolutely disdain in putting the individual first. Individualism, too much emphasis on the self is really dangerous to social harmony and social stability. In these small towns, residents monitored each other and punished or ostracized those who violated communal norms. Everyone had their eyes on everyone else. Remember, city on a hill means there's no secrets. Dissenters were not so much free to dissent as they were free to leave. If you don't like it, get out of here, go found another colony. Roger Williams, one dissenter, did just that. He advocated that the Massachusetts Bay Colony should separate church and state. And his intention there was to strengthen rather than weaken religion. He believed that government corrupted the purity of religion. And because in Puritan society, church and state were entwined, he said the church is going to be harmed by that close association with the state. The church is going to be harmed by corruption of politics. He gets banished from the colony for this, and he and his founders, his followers, I should say, founded Rhode Island, now a state, which became a beacon of religious freedom, like actual religious freedom with no established church, no religious qualifications for voting. You could actually practice other religions there. Other dissenters founded the colonies of Hartford and New Haven, these towns, which would eventually coalesce to be Connecticut. 1637, there's a crisis of dissent in the person of Anne Hutchinson. In 1637, the Puritan establishment found that Anne Hutchinson was particularly threatening because of her gender and her influence. She is a highly influential woman, powerful speaker, powerful thinker, and she is accused of criticizing church leaders, and she's accused of teaching men. She has two trials, one for the church, one for the state, same judges, same, and they find the same, oddly enough. So she's accused of criticizing church leadership, and they accuse her of holding essentially Bible studies in her home where men were present and she led. That is not allowed. Women under Puritanism can lead other women in Bible study, but they are not allowed to lead men. So they ask her over and over again, were men present? She says, no, men were not present. And they said, they ask her over and over again, there were no men. No. No men were there? No. When you read the Bible, there were not men present. No, I'm telling you. And then they changed their tactics a little bit. What if a man showed up? What would you do? What if a man asked you to teach him about the Bible? I'm paraphrasing from the court. They're literally asking these questions. What if 100 men asked you to teach them about the Bible? And Hutchinson is finally like, if 100 men asked me to teach them about the Bible, I would believe that God sent them to do so, and I would do it. And they're like, oh my God, did you hear this full confession of what she did? So these are the laws that she supposedly broke, teaching men and criticizing the church. But what they are really opposed to, what they are really concerned is going to damage their society, and what they want to denounce is Anne Hutchinson's antinomianism. Let me explain what antinomianism is. Hutchinson doesn't invent it, but she's a good example of American antinomianism. Antinomianism is the belief that your individual judgment, your own discernment in secular and sacred matters should be more important than church or state law. That the antinomianism is the idea that your understanding, your judgment matters more than church doctrine or state law. And they get at this in the court hearing when they're asking her, how did you come to believe what you believe? She says, through my reading of scripture. And they're like, but what you're saying is different than the church. And she says, yes, but I came to this by reading scripture. And then finally, when they keep asking her, but how do you know? How do you know you're right? She finally says, I received direct revelation from God, and it's over for her. It's absolutely over at that point. When she says she received direct revelation from God, she's out. Hutchinson and her family, her many children, I want to say 12, it might be higher. You can double check that on me. She is banished. She's banished from the colony. Her family moves to Rhode Island in that colony of descent. Most of them are killed in a Native American attack in Rhode Island. 1637, it's still dangerous. Followers of Anne Hutchinson who remained in Massachusetts Bay eventually became Quakers, a very radical and spiritually egalitarian Protestant sect, and they were banished as well. They were banished, but they were first whipped, and some of them were hanged for their Quakerism. Whew. Anne Hutchinson, what a mensch. All right, 1637, we're jumping ahead. We're going to jump all the way ahead to 1692 to discuss the Salem witch trials, which you've probably heard before. You may have seen the play, which was written during the American Cold War and is really a commentary on McCarthyism. So you probably know that many people were accused. Almost between 144 to 185 people were accused of being witches. Most of the accused were women. We'll talk about why. The first to confess was an enslaved woman named Tuba, and ultimately 20 would be executed, 19 by hanging. One man was pressed to death. They laid him down, put a board on top of him, and put rocks on the board until he died. You may have heard of different explanations. What hysteria took over the town of Salem that led them to this? You may have heard maybe there was lead in the water. They may have got a virus that, a bacterial meningitis that was damaging to their thinking. And there may have been physiological elements that affected their thought processes. But what you should understand is no part of the Salem witch trials is actually outside of the regular beliefs and worldviews of the Puritans. Everything that happens individually fit into a Puritan worldview, but it got entirely out of control. And ultimately, it's going to take other Puritans in Boston, when they realize what's happening in Salem, to go and end it. But much of what happens is well within the established worldview and belief system of Puritans. So things we want to understand. We want to understand that this is the end of a long period of executing witches in Europe, but also in the Americas. We want to understand that Puritans believe that the supernatural exists next to the natural here on earth. And we want to understand that Puritans have a culture of confessional, a culture of confessing and surveilling your neighbors, which was really ripe to have this type of hysteria. So let's dig in. What do I mean? This is the end of a long period of burning witches in Europe. Thousands of people were executed in the medieval and early modern period for being witches, but this is the tail end of it. And there is something about Salem that also sticks out. Across Europe and in the Americas, people that were executed for witchcraft tended to be outsiders, people that didn't fit into the great chain of being, people that had no place. Some of the people executed for witchcraft are people that we would understand are just non-neurotypical, right? That there's no place for them. There's no recognized way of being for them. A lot of the people that were, not a lot, but some of the people that were executed for being witches were wealthy widows. There's not a good place in the great chain of being for women with wealth. A good way of getting that wealth away from her is accusing her of being a witch. What's unusual in Salem is these were not outsiders. These were upstanding members of Puritan society that were accused of witchcraft and executed. Executing witches actually within the norms of society, at the tail end of those norms, I should say. We're really at the end of witch burning. But executing insiders for being witches, that's odd. What else do we want to understand? The Puritans believed that the supernatural and the natural exist side by side. For the Puritans, witchcraft was real. This isn't a metaphor. This isn't like just something you can't see. Witchcraft is real to them. And for them, the supernatural struggle between God and the devil is manifested on earth. Now think about their idea of themselves as a city upon a hill. By the 1690s, fewer and fewer Puritans were full church members. There were increasing numbers of people in New England that were not Puritans. Puritans and non-Puritans were increasingly more interested in accumulating wealth. Winthrop's model of love and charity, his model of the subordination of self-interest for a greater good, Winthrop's model of fairness and morality in lending, in business and employment, all of that seemed to be falling apart. If you're a Salemite in 1692 and you believe that God put you here to create this perfect Puritan society and it's falling apart, who are you going to blame? Who is at fault? The devil. They believe their society to be under threat, not from change, not from time, not from development, from the devil. Now, one other key thing to understand is that Puritans, like most Christians of the time, stressed the seductive allure of the devil. The devil would appear to you in whatever guise was most alluring to you. Yeah, so what happened? The first person accused is an enslaved woman named Tituba. You're going to read more about Tituba. We don't know a lot about her. We know that she was enslaved in the West Indies. We know she was brought into Salem by her enslaver, a reverend named Samuel Parris. And we know that several young girls accused her of hexing them, putting curses on them. Now you might say, well, wait, outsiders are accused of being witches. Tituba seems like an outsider, an enslaved woman of probably mixed Indian and African descent. We don't know. That seems like an outsider, but she is part of the household of a minister, Reverend Samuel Parris. She should be absolutely safe from accusations of witchcraft. By the way, this is a secondary source from the 20th century. Highly suspect. We should be very suspicious that this was Tituba or anything like what Tituba was up to. So she's accused and she's brought before the court. We've seen the court. We know that they're not going to stop asking questions until they get what they want. They keep asking Tituba, why did you hurt those girls? Not did you hurt those girls? Why did you hurt those girls? She says, I didn't. Why did you hurt them? I didn't. Why did you hurt them? And you can almost see her break in the transcripts of the court. Finally, she says, all right, yeah. The devil appeared to me as a tall, white-haired man in a dark coat, a hog, a great black dog, a black cat, a yellow bird, a hairy creature that walked on two legs, a creature with wings and two legs and a head like a woman. She told the packed courthouse that the devil promised her that I must serve him 6 years and he would give me many fine things. We went into the woods and I signed my name in blood in his book. And she says, Yeah, and you know those other white ladies you have in jail? They were there too. And you can almost imagine the women in jail waiting their own trials, like, Tituba? What? Was the court like, wait, what? What are you saying, Tituba? No, this was the court's reaction. I knew it. I knew it. That's exactly what I knew happened. Everything that Tituba described was exactly what the court expected to hear. She took their understanding of the devil, of seduction, of witchcraft in the woods where you sign your name in the devil's book. She took all of that and handed it to them and said, yes, that's what happened. And importantly, for understanding how these accusations spread, she said that all the witches came together in the woods, that they all saw each other. What Tituba creates is a situation where anyone that confesses after Tituba has to name other witches because Tituba said they were all there together. Why did so many people confess them? There's a couple of reasons. The first one's a good one. The only way to survive was to confess. If you were accused of witchcraft, you could deny it, be found guilty, and be executed. You could deny it and hope the court would believe you and not be executed. That happens to remarkably few people, most of them men. The court tended to believe men in their denials more often. Or you could confess to everything, be forgiven, and allowed to live. Now you might be saying, oh, I'm confessing and I'm getting out of town. Keep in mind you're a Calvinist. You believe that some people are preordained, predestined to be saved, and there's no way of knowing who is who. Think of the threat to your mortal soul that you would feel as a Puritan if you confessed witchcraft. Women tended to confess more often than men. Now, Puritans as a whole have a confessional society. Part of becoming a full church member is confessing your sins. They surveil each other, so everyone knows what each other's sins are, right? So you may as well confess. Let's look at a specific confession of witchcraft from a woman named Rebecca Eames. Rebecca Eames was asked, did you make a covenant with the devil? Well, first she was asked, did you sign that to the devil's book? No, I didn't sign a book. I wasn't in the woods. What are you talking about? Are you sure you didn't sign the book? Yeah, I did not sign the book. Well, did you make a covenant with the devil? No. Are you sure you didn't make a covenant with the devil? And she thinks about it and she says, wait, some years ago, I committed adultery. And I was so ashamed of what I had done. I went to the woods and I went to the barn and I got a rope to hang myself. And as I was about to commit suicide because of my adultery, I heard a little voice whisper in my ear, don't do it. No one will ever find out. And she says, and no one ever did. So wait, I think I did make a covenant with the devil. Eames interpreted her own failings, her own moral failings, as having made a covenant with the devil because she committed adultery and no one ever found out. She interpreted that in front of the court as, I think I must have made a covenant with the devil. Also note how the court has moved. First, it was you had to have signed the book to be a witch. Now it's anyone who says they made a covenant with the devil is a witch. This is going to be one of the reasons that a lot of people are going to be accused. If it's just, have you done sin and not confessed it? Have you done a sin and gotten away with it? You made a covenant with the devil. Now, this also goes back to that Puritan confessional practice. And they wrote them down. The church, so before the Salem witch trials, just confessing to become a member of the church, we have documents that have these confessions written down. And we see that, again, these are not court cases, these are church confessionals. We see in these confessions that women more often tended to confess sinful natures. I'm a gossip. I'm a spendthrift, I'm an adulteress. They confess these sinful natures, where Puritan men tended to confess specific sins. I gambled and I stopped and I don't do that anymore. I used to drink and I stopped and I don't do that anymore. This might mean then that women in the courtroom are more susceptible to agreeing that they made a covenant with the devil because they believed their own natures to be sinful, that they had a common bond with the devil through these sins. Now the court gets worse. Rebecca Nurse is another woman. She refuses to confess. Nope, I did not sign a book. I was not in the woods. I didn't make a covenant with the devil. Finally, the magistrate asks her, have you been led aside by temptations? And she admitted, yes, I have been led aside by temptations. They found her guilty of witchcraft. This is the hysteria taking over, right? Anyone who even acknowledges they've been led aside by temptations, that they've been tempted, gets put in the book. At this point in the trials, the only person that might be found not guilty is like maybe Jesus himself, maybe. Now, so people that did deny it tended to not be believed. A few men were believed. And part of this might be the way that they responded to these accusations. One man, George Jacob Sr., he shouted at the court, "You tax me for a wizard? You might as well tax me for a buzzard." Tax me, take me, accuse me. Accuse me of being wizard? You may as well accuse me of being a buzzard. Yes, he did say wizard, a male witch. And he was actually found not guilty. Part of this is that Puritans believe that men are more capable of resisting the devil's seductions than women. As I said, how does this all end? They do not come to their senses. They don't lead a rebellion and let people out of the prison. Puritans in Boston figure out what they're doing and put a stop to it. And they change the law so that a confession to witchcraft is no longer enough evidence to be executed. So keep in mind that even when the Bostonians come and say, what are you doing? Oh my God, stop. They don't say we have to stop executing people for being witches. They say we have to have enough evidence of witchcraft to execute people for being witches. All right, and this is just this is a primary source. It's Tituba's, the primary source of Tituba's court transcript, which we have. We have all of this. We have wonderful primary sources on the Salem witch trials because they dutifully wrote everything down. You have a little bit of work. Go learn about Tituba. You could take the lecture, module 3 lecture exit exam, and I will see you. Oh my gosh, something in my eye. I will see you in module 4. Have a good one. Oh my God.